We cannot talk about podcasts without talking about Joe Rogan. He's inked a new multi-year deal with Spotify.
Yeah.
So we got to talk
What do
about
we
that.
call him? The podcast czar or the king podcaster? I mean, obviously he's number one when it comes to, I mean, and he started it back in the early 2000s before podcasting was even a thing, but he's definitely the biggest podcaster out there. New
Oh, yeah.
contract with Spotify worth as much as $250 million over its multi-year term. These are big, big numbers for one single person that is hosting a weekly regular show. What's different about this renewal, Kayla, that you and I were talking about is before, and it made sense. Spotify said, we're going to give you all this money, but you got to be exclusive to Spotify. That way we can get all your listeners over to our platform, and you can't upload your full episodes to YouTube. You can't upload your full episodes to other platforms. And because of that, they were able to recruit a lot of Joe Rogan's audience to purchase Spotify. That way they can get their Joe Rogan fix, if you will, on the Spotify platform. What's really interesting about this new deal, it is no longer exclusive. Joe Rogan can post a podcast wherever he wishes. It's still going to live on Spotify, and they're going to be ad partners. So therefore, they feel like they can get more views collectively and make more money as a team collectively if it lives on YouTube and Spotify and Apple Podcasts and. What's really interesting, I was actually listening to the Andrew Scholes Flagrant 2 podcast, and he made a really brilliant point. What Spotify was trying to do with that original deal, and let's think about this as marketers, they were trying to do something that's very, very difficult to do. Change consumer behavior. As podcast fans, a lot of us go straight to Apple Podcasts. A lot of us were conditioned to go to YouTube. What Spotify did, the reason they spent the original $250 million to make Joe Rogan exclusive is, hey, oh, by the way, we have podcasts on Spotify. I know you already listen to the music in your car and in the gym. You also should really check out our podcast section because we have a lot of amazing podcasts. And the majority of people like the business of social. We upload our podcast to YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. I think consumers overall would forget just the education part of it that, oh, I can also get my fix on Spotify and keep it all under one app. What's brilliant about what they did and what Andrew Scholes broke down more eloquently than I could, and I would recommend checking out this episode on YouTube or this clip, is they now have changed consumer behavior. A lot of people, including myself, that used to go to Apple Podcasts and search in the bar, entrepreneur podcast, business podcast, whatever. I'm now doing that in Spotify, or at least doing it much more than I did before. And they feel like they've checked the consumer behavior box where they've been able to really shift the market. And no different. We always make the joke, right? It's like, whatever happened to Postmates? Like they used to have, the game on lock. And I'm sure listeners are like, why is David so obsessed with this Postmates thing? But they used to, just like with Skype, right? Skype, they always say during COVID, they had a 20-year head start and still found a way to fumble the bag. Here comes Zoom. And I think, when you change consumer behavior and somebody has such a market share on something like podcasting and Spotify wants to reverse that or change where you go to when you're searching in that search bar, much like TikTok has done. I find myself searching on TikTok much more than I do on Google because I want the 60-second recap of what's going on with the Diddy story or whatever may be happening in the news, rather than searching a bunch of articles and maybe not getting the summary I'm looking for. So that's big. That's really big that, again, not only are these individuals like Mr. Beast and Joe Rogan and Shannon Sharp making a ton of money and getting these incredible like LeBron James type contracts or Messi type contracts with their media, but I thought it was really interesting the way Andrew Scholes broke that down is Spotify paid a lot of money to change consumer behavior. And the reason why it's not exclusive in this second deal is they feel like they did change the consumer behavior.